Yes, the Famine. Little evening video. I am very tired, friends. I am currently recording a very big album of black metal, over 55 minutes. Old school freezing black metal. And I am recording the vocals in this kitchen because the acoustics are very unique. And I'm taking advantage of my setup to send this video that I wanted to make 3 months ago, following an article from La Montagne. So, La Montagne, for those who don't know, it's a very big local newspaper from Auvergne. We're not talking about an anti-fascist fanzine made by the homeless from the street next door. The problem being that this famous newspaper has committed the irreparable, I would say. No kidding, they did something serious, really serious. I may seem like I'm joking, but I'm not joking at all. Basically, in addition to the usual nonsense repeated about PESTE NOIRE, like that I would be the representative of the worldwide Nazism, if not more. While for 20 years I've been rejecting the NS label. Anyway, that's not the most important thing. On top of the usual nonsense, now they've gone... They've gone, I don't know, they went on a trip or something and they started throwing out that... So I chose my stage name in reference to the anti-Semitic pogrom of the Middle Ages. So the stage name, I don't know if it's PESTE NOIRE or Famine or what, but at some point, guys, you need to present sources, you know? I mean, you can't just make up anything and everything, especially in such an important newspaper. Well, fine. That's really a bitter accusation. But they don't stop there. They are ultra... inspired. Inspired. That's the word. Because they even dug up a text that's more than 20 years old, guys. Yeah. It doesn't make me feel any younger. I am thinking and telling myself, it indeed dates back more than 20 years, but it's actually 25 years old. Fuck. A text. Then at a time when there's no news about PESTE NOIRE, nothing is happening. They throw this article in my face without warning, without any notice. And so, in this text, I'm supposed to be calling for the murder of our friends, the Jews. So there's a little problem. It's that this song he's talking about, it was recorded on that. But I mean, it recorded everything actually. We placed it on the floor. Nej played the drums, I played the guitar, and I screamed into a microphone that was, well, my voice was picked up by an amp. This here, the microphone, I might do a... Here, the microphone. It is here. Do you see the microphone head? Huh. So, these psychoacousticians or acousticians, I don't know how to say it, from La Montagne, deciphered the text. Because I must clarify that the text has never been published anywhere. Neither in the booklet nor anywhere else. So, at some point I have to tell you the truth. It turns out that the text, what they unearthed, is 100% authentic. How it ended up on the internet, I have no idea. At the time we communicated a lot through letters. So I imagine someone published it online. And well, I don't care, I have no problem admitting it is authentic. There is just one issue. Nowhere in this text is there any mention of Jews. It's a misanthropic text like many from that time, in the early 2000s. A basic text written by a minor. Myself. I even remember the text. So I'll recite it to you. Alone I am, alone I will forever be, surrounded by these beings whom I loathe and cursed. In these places I will put an end to your sad lives there. So it's not talking about the Jews. At no point do I say, in these places I will put an end to the sad lives of the Jews. But La Montagne, no, they said, yes, 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 you're talking about the Jews. Well, I must say that the demo's title is called Supremacy. Well, it's a bit tricky, I admit. But in any case, at no point in the demo is there mention of Jews. So at some point, people need to stop saying anything. It happens that in France there is a right, absolute, which is called the right of reply. When you are defamed by a media outlet, you have the possibility to defend yourself by exercising at least a right of reply. This is what I did, and the media in question has the legal obligation to publish your response. Of course, if your response is not off topic, that you remain polite, etc. What I did was a perfectly crafted right of reply with the lawyer. Something very polished, very neat, well condensed, well put together. But it turns out that the mountain told me, no, 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 not you. You do not have the right. You do not have the right to respond. So that's where we stand. I sued them. Verdict in 1.5 months. But in the meantime, I will read you this famous right of reply. You never know. Maybe it will never be published. And I will take advantage of the video format to go into more detail and elaborate. Hello, sirs of La Montagne. In response to your article of October 11th, 2024, I want to remind you of the sources, original and composite inspiration of my band, PESTE Noire, far from the clichés conveyed by my critics. PESTE Noire, then to the ideological sources of the Spanish phalanx, of the German conservative revolution, and French personalists from the 1930s. I could have said the nonconformists of the 1930s. Basically, the French personalists of the 1930s are a branch of the nonconformists of the 1930s. And I carefully skipped mentioning another influence, which is the first Italian fascism. The word fascism, I don't need to explain to you, is too negatively connoted. And rightly so, because when people hear the word fascism, it resonates with the memory of the second fascism, which was reactionary, overstatus, anti-libertarian, very prudish, in a word, totalitarian. Everything we dislike about fascism. However, it so happens that the first fascism is anarchist, republican and libertarian. So, I repeat, the first fascism is indeed anarchist, in the sense that it demands a maximum decentralization of the state. But not only that. I'll quickly go into a bit of detail. In 2 seconds, what am I forgetting? This will be somewhat the guiding thread then, the anarchism of this first paragraph, in the sense that the 4 movements, the 4 sources of inspiration that I invoke in PESTE Noire, have this particularity of mixing into their nationalist project, into their identity quests, a part of anarchist ideology. And so it is to this anarchizing fascism that I personally pay tribute when I make little salutes on stage. But try explaining to a magistrate that when you make a fascist salute on stage, you're doing it in homage to the first anarchizing fascism. I admit, not sure it will work. A brief overview of the four aforementioned movements. We begin with the Spanish phalanx. So, Spanish phalanx, beautiful beast. Now that, if you can buy it, this book is incredible. José Antonio, The Spanish Phalanx and National Syndicalism by Arnold Himatz, which I used to feed into my own book, Antioch. The first part of a trilogy that I am currently concluding with part 3. It might be important to first clarify that the Spanish phalanx develops an ideology that is very close to that of the Johns. Host to the Johns. These two neighboring tribes, let's put it that way, that we can label under the National Syndicalist tag. So when I talk about the phalange or the Johns, I'm roughly talking about national syndicalism. What interests me in national syndicalism is that it is clearly anarchistic. I have in front of me an excerpt from the political manifesto of the conquest of the state, where I see that the Spanish phalanx and the Johns demand what? They demand a multitude of social bodies governing and administering themselves, the full autonomy of municipalities in their traditional economic and administrative functions, the favoring of small individual family, communal and entrepreneurial property to the detriment of large trusts, with direct grants involving the state as little as possible. Money created by the organic community and distributed directly to the organic community. I repeat, while minimizing passage through the state. This is Proudhon-style anarchism, and which explains that the numbers of the Jones, Arnold Himatz tells us, were secretly inflated with former leaders and anarchist militants from the CNT. So, Arnold, he mentions a few famous names apparently. I don't know them, but they were famous. Sotomayor, Salaya, Olala. I'm not saying Olala. The guy's name is really Olala. And right there, the ex-leader. So leader, not just anyone, of the CNT, Angel Pestana. On the Italian squadristi side, get this gem. I don't know if you can see the name of the author well. It's unpronounceable, so I won't try. What interesting things does he tell us about squadrism, the early fascism? He tells us that squadrism was driven by these soldiers, very rock and roll, who were the Arditi, and of whom he said the reputation swung between bravery and a cruel lack of discipline. The Arditi offered to Mario Piazzi. Who knows? Him. He's a very young squadrist militant who experienced the squadrismo saga from the inside and kept a diary. So he unveils its mysteries to us from the front row. And so the author of this book tells us that the Arditi offered Mario Piazzi the chance to escape bourgeois life. Squadristi, the author tells us, sometimes departs from defending the middle-class world and is defined by new values, where respect for norms of civility is almost absent. I love it. What does Mario tell us in his diary? He says, I thought of tea in our parlors, the delicate sandwiches, the kisses. I compare them to this indescribable wine that scratches the throat, to these donuts soaked in rancid oil. Ultimately, it may be that all this is just the revolt against the placid family life. with the stale atmosphere that we could no longer breathe. And the conclusion is magnificent. Someone said that if fascism did not exist, the most exuberant youth would become anarchists. So further in his personal diary, Mario tells us that he about the prefect than about the king. It's beautiful. And I am using this excerpt in the next CPN. What do we have left? The German Conservative Revolution. So it's a vast movement that encompasses a lot of very diverse things. And let's say what I will pick out of this movement. It's what was called the peasant movement, which was a sort of rebellion inviting people to get rid of which invited throwing out bailiffs and bankers with pitchforks. So the French equivalent would be Dorger and his green shirts, which I have already talked about in another interview. There remains the presentation of the nonconformists of the 1930s. I will close my window and I'll be back. How to present the nonconformists of the 30s in 10 seconds. You are not supposed you're not supposed to be unaware that fascism, second version, meaning the second fascism I mentioned to you earlier, which is a totalitarianism, and German National Socialism, which is also a totalitarianism, developed in reaction to two existing poles at the beginning of the 20th century, namely Soviet communism on one hand, and on the other hand, American liberalism and capitalism. So, these constitute two paths. Fascism and National Socialism rose up against these two paths by proposing a very statist third way. And there is a sort of fourth way that takes up the ideas of National Socialism and fascism by rejecting statism. And it turns out that this fourth way is embodied by the nonconformists of the 1930s. So they will seek to develop a non-Marxist National Socialism that would have a foundation national, thus seeking out rather French origin socialist theorists. And in this case, these nonconformists will turn to Proudhon, which suits me perfectly personally, since Proudhon is not a socialist, but an anarchist. One could say that a socialism, national, in the French style, it delightfully resembles a form of national anarchism. And all of this is ultimately quite logical, since I remind you that the first French fascist party was created by Georges Valois, an anarchist. Keep in mind, throughout the interview, that my anarchism certainly prevents me from being NS, but it does not prevent me from building bridges with Italian Squadrismo, the Spanish Phalanx, the nonconformists of the 1930s, and the German Conservative Revolution. Many of my ideological inspirations had conflicts with the National Socialists. Ernst Jünger searched by the Gestapo. Emmanuel Mounier arrested by the Germans in 1942. Georges Valois, whom I just mentioned, who ended his days in a camp. Needless to say, a German camp. The National Socialists persecuted the aristocracy of French workers, which PN particularly praises in his album Antioche. The companions were ignorance, thus one. I articulate poorly. So I'll clarify that it is indeed ignorance, it's not culture. Where the ignorance of the Nazis made them confuse their symbols. So they confused the symbols of the companions with those of the Freemasons. So the German, he's like that. He's a bit hot-headed. He sees a square, a compass. He draws his Schmeisser, and he fires away at my pals, companions, which I particularly praise in Antioch. So, needless to say, it's problematic since claiming from a movement that literally went up in the air. My mentors, my spiritual companions of the past, it's a bit complicated. As a good follower of the anarchist Proudhon, here we go again with him. I am completely against centralism. State planning, bureaucratism, regimentation, substitution of the state for the family. So this, people know very little. But it is a rather Vichy's position, meaning that the Vichy's are not aligned with the National Socialists in every way. The two French and German sensitivities, even if they collaborated, are not always on the same page. So the Vichites say roughly that the family unit is the alpha and omega of society. The state power must find its limits in the family. Whereas with the Nazis, the state clearly has an excessive say over the family. So I also protest against repressive engineering, the control of art, culture, and leisure, the crackdown of the society established by the National Socialists. So, mise au pas, you should know that it's a term from Nazi vocabulary, meaning that it is proudly claimed. It's not an insult at all for them. And this term could also be translated as mechanization, normalization of society. That is to say, the National Socialists were hygienists who absolutely wanted to hunt down the social elements, which makes it all the more complicated, the identification of these major anti-socials that are the National Socialist black metal enthusiasts, who are, to put it briefly, people with long dirty hair, who are absolutely unsociable, which makes it even more complicated to identify our dear NS black metalheads with this movement. Eugenicist, that was National Socialism. So I remind you, since I was talking about the regimentation of society, mechanization, normalization, control, absolute over everything that moves in a country, that Goebbels, via the Reich Chamber of Culture, controlled absolutely everything cultural: cinema, literature, graphic art, plastic art, and music. If there is indeed one person in this room who feels concerned through the control of music, that's definitely me. So the Nazis, like today's digital platforms, decided which music was suitable or not for the cattle that you are. It is unthinkable to write that Peste Noire is the standard bearer of National Socialist black metal, while I've spent 23 years refuting such affiliation. I am not a National Socialist. By its form, Peste Noire cannot be NS. Peste Noire is not NS, not only in written and video interviews, but also in my latest work, the album Dieppe. So here, I'm quoting myself, sorry to self-indulge, but it happens that I write hundreds of pages to explain why KPN is not NS, yet it seems the big players definitely do not read me. Otherwise, they wouldn't publish this kind of article about us. So, I say in this book, Antioch, having always refused the NS label, I have become one of the representatives of an SBM by default. I am going to make myself something to eat, and I picked up a substitute microphone so I can continue this video without wasting time, because I have to continue my recording as quickly as possible. Why are anti-fascists and leftist journalists so obsessed with linking you by all possible means to that barely 12-year saga that was National Socialism? Well, it is very simple. In the mind of a normie, NS is simply synonymous with pedophile or serial killer, which makes it convenient for Antifas, since once they have attached this label to you on the head, and that Wikipedia confirms that you are a villain Nazi. Well, you are blacklisted everywhere. And that is indeed the plan of our dear anti-fascists. So all this is part of a long communist tradition that had the wind in its sails during the communism of the USSR. It is what Orwell called vaporization. So in the USSR, it meant erasing all traces of your existence, making it as if you had never existed. Today, people hardly buy music in physical format anymore. More and more people are just consuming music as renters rather than as owners, meaning they no longer become owners of a physical medium. They are going to rent music on a very limited number of platforms that can be counted on the fingers of one hand. And they will give, I do mean, give a monopolistic character. So they will give a monopoly to these platforms, since these platforms do not come to your house to force you to pay a subscription. It's people who decide that they will all listen to music from around the world in the same place. In this case, today, Spotify, but it could be something else. It could be something else in the future. But for now, people, let's say, have given Spotify a monopoly over global music. This implies a big problem that Proudhon had already anticipated. As always, Proudhon anticipated many current problems. It is about the problem of centralization. From the moment, well, I'll quickly explain. If you start from the premise that people, let's say 99%, I will exaggerate deliberately, but at least it will be clear. Assume that 99% of people listen to all the artists from around the world in the same place. And suppose that the space where 99% of people listen to music, since they no longer consume it materially, suppose that this place decides that you are not compliant, that your music does not conform to the dominant doxa, and this platform decides to kick you out. You disappear from 99% of the space where people listen to music. So, you might as well say you disappear altogether. I continue by taking my logic a bit further. What's his name? Proudhon imagined a communist scenario. Which was nightmarish in his eyes. Proudhon says that if tomorrow the state of a given country decided to take control of all the printing presses in the country,
the printing presses in the country. This would present a great danger, since the state could censor intellectual and literary production at its source. And it would be all the easier. That's why Proudhon supports both decentralization, decentralizing powers to prevent a single power from abusing its monopoly. And with decentralization, Proudhon praises of small property, which would in this case mean having one's own printing press and to constitute a counterpower. I don't know if you know this dystopian novel, Fahrenheit 451. I haven't read the novel, but I've seen the movie. And in this movie, firefighters in the pay of a totalitarian regime come to people's homes to burn non-conforming books. We could imagine, for example, that today firefighters, according to the author's scenario, would come to people's homes to burn CDs of absurd or PESTE noire. And if we were to transpose Fahrenheit 451 to today, those famous firemen would not have to go to millions of people to burn your CDs. They would just have to go to 2, 3, 4 places, namely the monopolistic platforms, to boot your music. That is to say, stage a worldwide book burning. That's where I wanted to get to, that today, with the dematerialization of music coupled with centralization, we can vaporize like we never dreamed of. We can stage gigantic book burnings. Irony of fate to write that PESTE noire is the banner of NSBM. The irony of fate when you know that I do not hesitate to rely on the works of the Israeli Ziv Sternhell. Now, Ziv Sternhell was not particularly a political ally, but I admire his work as a historian. Of the Israelite Emile Benveniste, who, however, was my friend. I discovered him on the benches of the Faculty of Letters. Because Emile Benveniste, in addition to being pro-Indo-European, was a linguist. That's how it's through this, to him, through that discipline. So, irony of fate when you know that I don't hesitate to rely on the works of Sternhell, Benveniste, or even on the work of Henri Pourrat, a central influence of the album Le Retour des Pastoraux, who, during the occupation, helped Jewish refugees by welcoming them into his home. I have a concept to revitalize in music the French nationalist authors of the 19th century, early 20th, and it is false to say that I chose them for their anti-Semitism. While they represent for me the critique of industrial machinery, rural exodus, destruction of identities, rootless finance. The problem being that in the 19th century and in the 20th century, a very large majority of Jews spoke in favor of cosmopolitanism and uprooting, and that often the criticism of uprooting coincides with the criticism of Jews at that time. Fortunately, we had some Jews on our side, and it comes just at the right time. For this video, Jews of the German Conservative Revolution. In this book by Robert Stecker, Robert tells us that the young Jewish metapolitical activists of Vienna in the last decades of the 19th century intended to break away from a certain Judaism of their fathers, which they deemed stereotypical. They rebelled against the stereotypical image that automatically made the Jew an exclusively intellectual and artificial being, deprived of roots and connections to nature, and consequently, perfectly suited to the capitalist and urban environment that the nationalists criticized. That's what I state in my right of reply. The young Jewish and pan-Germanic activists actually believed that this stereotyping was not false in itself, and that it should be overcome through efforts of will. The Jewish man in German society had to abandon this intellectualism. Well, that's not necessarily what I think. And this sterile artificiality to rediscover roots and connections with nature, just like Christian or Aryan Germans. I'm trying to tell you that in Peste Noire, there is no monomaniacal fixation on the figure of a Jew who would be malevolent by essence. I will highlight historical examples of Jews who were clearly on our side. But before doing that, we should first agree on what exactly we mean when we talk about Jews. Often, when they are mentioned in a conversation, there is always someone who thinks they are intelligent by wanting to defend Jews by the worst means, namely by saying, no, but Jews are not a race. Jews, it's a religion first. The problem being that the Jewish religion, the founding text of the Jewish religion, Talmud, Old Testament, and Torah, which are roughly the same, clearly invite the subjugation of neighboring nations, even the nations of the entire world, not only neighboring ones, to seize their wealth, even admit to the forbidden, that is, to sacrifice to God a part of these enemy nations. I will not go further in this direction so that the video remains on YouTube, but just read the Bible, Old Testament, Deuteronomy. Form your own opinion on the matter by yourself. So I am not going to defend the Jews as a religious group. The second problem being that if I consider that the Jews are a racially homogeneous people, it also becomes a bit complicated since among the Jews, there are Berbers who have adopted Judaism. These are the Sephardim. There are Middle Eastern tribes mixed with Aryans who are the Ashkenazim. And there are Turks also converted to Judaism in the past who were the Khazars. I will start with a slightly more convenient definition, that of Evola, who says that the Jews are a people of the Spirit. And if the Jews are a people of the Spirit, then at that moment, I have plenty of examples of Jewish friends, and notably in the German Conservative Revolution, Victor Adler, who said that music should create the feeling. Socialist and national, rather the community sense, socialist and national. One of his contemporaries, Fried Jung, he, on the KPN line, said that advocated for aid to the small German peasantry, a tax relief for the disadvantaged German classes. And these are the words that pan-Germanist Jew wanted. Clearly rule out cosmopolitan liberalism, who ignore the authentic needs of the national community. I could also send a fraternal greeting. Send a fraternal greeting to those 230 Jewish fascists who marched on Rome. I could send a fraternal greeting to those 700 and some Jews registered in the Italian National Fascist Party. I could send a greeting friendly to those 9 Jewish deputies. Elected under the fascist label in 1921. I could talk to you about the Indologist Sylvain Lévy, who, how to put it in a politically correct way, said that the Indo-Europeans held a fine place on the podium of humanity. I could talk to you about Heinz Eink, so Hans Heinz Eink, a German Jew psychologist who sponsored the Gresse Committee, Gresse Grouping Research on European Civilization by Alain de Benoist, and who was not afraid to display his conclusions, which today would be immediately demonized, namely that they're too, how to say it politically correctly, that he was not afraid to display his conclusions that Europeans did not defend themselves so poorly in terms of IQ compared to the Afro-American IQ. I could also talk to you about André Maurois, a French Jewish writer who falls at the front in 1914 to 1918, gets repatriated, is exempted from the war, but who, despite doctors and hospital recommendations, returns to fight. A Jewish writer who was supported by Marshal Pétain to the French Academy. This shows that things are not as simple as Hollywood storytelling would have you believe. So, I see where you're going. You are going to tell me, okay, in that case, why, Mr. Famine, do you include odious collaborators in your albums by incorporating speeches? For example, your dear mentor Jacques. Doriot, it happens to be convenient. I studied the subject a bit, and this guy, Bernard Henri Lejeune, if I recall correctly, is the son of a historical activist of the PPF who benefited from this forward position to investigate more closely the history of the PPF. And what does he say to us? He tells us, I need to find the page. I don't know if it's him writing or a guy who is testifying. Well, in short, must we remind that among the first companions of Jacques Doriot and the 6 members of the National Bureau, called the Provisional Bureau of the PPF, was a Jew of Polish origin, a worker of the gas company, Alexander Abramsky, municipal councillor of Saint-Denis, and he remained invested with important responsibilities until his death, which occurred accidentally in February 1938. Should we recall that Bertrand de Jouvenel's mother was Jewish? In the organizations of the PPF, both in Paris and in the provinces, there was a certain number of Israelites, some of whom experienced their Golgotha after 1945. Indeed, it was not favorable in that terrible year to have shown sympathy to the man from Saint-Denis, Jacques Doriot, even when one was Jewish. A Parisian printer, Jewish and a Doriot supporter, had this cruel experience until his death in Swiss exile. Where I'm trying to lead you to the fact that in Black Plague, there is no obsessive fixation, monomaniac on the figure of a Jew who would be inherently malevolent and genetically programmed to destroy us. I have just proven that we have had quite a few friends and allies among them. In any case, what I just told you is a breaking point with NS ideology, and that's what I wanted to emphasize. So yes, Peste Noire embraces a certain extravagance that includes the fool, milk, and monsters. You see that I include the National Socialist black metal fans. In its music, my aesthetic model is the Gothic gargoyle.
the fusion of the monstrous and the beautiful, not muscular, naked men. So here, I'm referring to the favored art of National Socialism. Period. Jérôme Bosch versus Breker. So, Breker, the sculptor of Nazi statues. That, my friends, is a typical cover of Kepian artworks. Now, him, for sure, he is not a Nazi. He is. However, he's a Nazi, but he was not accepted. So him, he's a prospect. He puts in the effort, but judging by his face, look closely, I'm not sure he'll finish the tests. Maybe him, because he's already standing and is more viable than the others. All that to tell you what, friends, that art is reborn, and by definition, well, not by definition, it was frozen by the aesthetic tastes of hash. So here, NS is shaped by the tastes of Hitler, who was fixated on ancient Rome and ancient Greece, which is always a bit amusing, knowing that the NS are in practice Nordicists, meaning that they consider the Nordics to be superior to all the peoples of the world, but superior even to their Indo-European cousins. Except that, well, when they see that Southern Europe defends itself a bit better from an architectural point of view, what do? They send researchers to prove that the greatness of Southern Europe is due to the fact that there were actually Nordics. So it's the opposite of science. The Nazis start from their desire, their ideology, and they ask their researchers to confirm what they already know. And this allows me to move on to the next paragraph, which says strictly the same thing. Peste Noire also celebrates Auvergne and Occitania throughout the album. According to Christian Ingrao, research director at the CNRS and specialist in this ideology, these were considered second-rate territories for the National Socialists. The Hitlerian tendencies of the NS were very strongly Nordicist. They were supremacist, even within the European geographic area. While there are quite a few NS there, very northern, as I was saying, the Strasser brothers. The Strasser brothers are Nazis. More leftist than the Hitlerian National Socialists. And they are more into the idea of putting all the motherlands on equal footing, which means that they are very friendly with some of the nonconformists of the 1930s. And here we come back to Proudhon and his European federalism, which makes the nonconformists get along well with the Black Front and the Strasser brothers. Once again, a minor incident occurred. The Hitlerian Nazis exterminated them. As for the group's style, it impresses enthusiasts with the originality you mentioned, Mr. Malik. Open quotes. Rap-style phrasing with sometimes gypsy-like sounds. Close quotes. So basically the guy writes an article accusing me of being the standard bearer of National Socialism, and at the same time he specifies that I infuse my music with phrasing in a rap style with sometimes gypsy sounds. Very Nazi like that. The sometimes gypsy sounds, that's very Nazi. And the rap style phrasing too, that's very Nazi. Which seems to me totally incompatible, I say, with the ideology and aesthetics of National Socialism. I might just throw in a sample of the track by Peste Noire, Cochon Carotte, et les sœurs Crottes. To illustrate this paragraph, Cochon Carotte et les sœurs Crottes, which by the way, would have been considered degenerate. Venice, but which I think would have greatly appealed to the Italian fascist futurist who developed a very bold, very daring, unlike, as I've already told you, I think, the NS conservatism. Italian fascist art, futurism in this case, had the intelligence to practice a classical modernist eclecticism, a process that I use in KPN, except that I am not Italian. I'm not referring to ancient Rome. Ancient France has completely disappeared. The only traces left of the Gauls, for example, are almost non-existent. So when I want to practice a form of archaeofuturism, a modernist eclecticism, drawing something from the grandeur of my past, I practice a medieval modernist eclecticism. Since France obviously peaks, it truly shines with the Middle Ages. Medieval modernist eclecticism. That explains the logo of my label. A knight wielding a machine gun. There. Well, I'm wrapping up, kids. I'm a bit tired. I remind you that even the words of a supremacist, composed 24 years ago and whose unintelligible lyrics never appeared anywhere, had a purely misanthropic content. At no time do I mention Jews in particular. Finally, the name Peste Noire does not refer at all, contrary to what you write, open quotes, to the anti-Jewish pogroms during the bubonic plague of the 14th century, close quotes. Plenty of black metal bands reference the bubonic plague without any connection to the Jews. The name Black Plague refers to the essence of black metal, which aims to be dark and medieval. Well, obviously, that's very... It's very cliché. It's a bit too obvious for insiders like you. If you're watching this video, you're insiders. You're black metal fans, certainly insiders. There. I had to adapt to the people who are supposed to read the right of reply. They're not black metal fans. It would probably be Michel and Josiane. The conclusion of all this is that after everything I just told you, be 1000% certain that the anti-fascists, far-left activists will continue to say that I am the spokesperson for contemporary National Socialism. I am under no illusions about that. But at least I said what was on my mind. So yes, I know what you're going to say. You'll talk about my collaborations, and that's perfect because I'll end on that. First, I'd like to discuss the timeline. Let me explain. In 2014, Peste Noire was considered a nationalist group, completely soft. We were very accepted and very acceptable. At that time, all the extreme metal webzines were promoting me without me asking for anything. They reviewed my albums. In short, people knew that we were nationalists, but we weren't blacklisted yet. At that time, it had already been a while since we hadn't done a concert with Peste Noire, a few years, something like 5 or 6 years still. The last concert was in 2008 or 2009 in Norway, but in 2008, we had even done a tour in Canada of 13 dates in Canada, which corroborates what I just told you, namely, that we were still considered somewhat respectable. When I announced that we were going to do concerts again, the anti-fascists launched an absolutely catastrophic campaign of pressure tactics. For several days, the first concert of the next tour has been announced in Limousin, a secret location that will only be revealed this Saturday at noon, as some dates have already been cancelled due to pressure from associations. The reason being nationalism associated with neo-Nazi ideology. On his Facebook account, the group's leader defends against any conflation. Pressure tactics to all the mainstream non-politicized organizations that wanted us to play, and it worked. I recall that we were ready in 2014 or 2015, I don't remember, to play in Norway with Napalm Death. That didn't bother us at all. So Napalm Death, which is a leftist band, for those who don't know, even far left. As it happens, from the moment we were able to play Norway, there were only the NS, who not only wanted us, but also once we understood that we wouldn't be able to perform concerts, the NS were professionals in organizing clandestine concerts. And so we lined up the concerts organized by NS organizers. And the argument of the Antifas becomes, look, they only play with NS. That's even on Wikipedia now. They only play with NS, so they are NS, but bunch of. You can't stop me from doing normal concerts and then blame me for do concerts with the only people who want us. In life, there is the dream and the reality. The dream would be to do concerts with people who are, for example, on the line of the nonconformists of the 1930s. And in life, that doesn't exist. I did with what was, how to say, what was available to me. And I specified that I have no regrets. When I collaborated with Militant Zone, the Ukrainian label, well, Russian-Ukrainian, I believe that never in the history of Peste Noire has a third-party organization put so many resources into to do great things. So I recall that, for example, for the release of The Last Coup, the release took place downright in a huge cinema in the capital. And throughout Kiev, there were posters of The Last Putsch, posters of Peste Noire at bus stops. That did not stop me. To remain honest, insofar as it's still on the Militante Zone website, I was already saying at that time on Militante Zone that I was not a supremacist, that I was not NS, and that on the contrary, I felt affinities almost with the first Italian fascism. Never forget that it's on Militante Zone. But I released a live clip, a cover in tribute to the Paris Commune. So I haven't shifted my stance, but indeed, I did what is called realpolitik. I did with what was available to me. I did not let myself die. When the Antifas blocked the doors of public concerts for me. Now, I will give you the most basic definition of anarchism. Anarchism advocates for the autonomy of moral conscience beyond good and evil, defined by a majority orthodoxy. So anarchism advocates for the autonomy of conscience. It is not for me to say,
To the people, for example, NS, who come to participate in the work of PESTE NOIRE, what they should or should not think. It's not up to me to tell them, hey guys, you're going too far. You're being a bit too rigid on this or that theme. On the essential, namely the preservation and the defense of European identity, we are moving in the same direction. I will constantly in my life be led to frequent NS since, as I said, life is not an imaginary world. When you're a FAF, you go to a party, there's an NS, there's a traditional Catholic, there's a guy more aligned with Croix de Feu sensibility, another one with a leaning towards the new right, there's a Zemmour supporter, there's an anti-Semite. It's impossible in this scene, which is black metal and is far too connected to the NS world, to sort things out and clean up. There will always a guy who played in a project where the bassist had a former band released on such label, which hosted another National Socialist group. I mean, the connections are too numerous. For a very simple reason, black metal was born in Scandinavia, in Northern Europe, and black metal is not a safe space. It's quite the opposite. That is to say, black metal formally evokes danger, fear, and hate. And when you have a style of music that originates from Northern Europe and evokes hatred, and the danger, the nods to National Socialism were, I would say, almost obligatory. There were inevitably going to be guys who would play on that. It was unavoidable. So, what I'm saying is that I'll never do the housework. I will continue to collaborate with whomever I want. And this is also true for people who might not necessarily be nationalists. You anti-fascists, make sure to highlight the NS affiliations of some of my contributors. But never do the Antifas mention that, for example, we had a Cambodian bassist. And yes, Street Press, La Montagne, and all the others don't talk about that. Never. When I say in this split album, 0% racist, 100% identitarian. 0% racist, 100% identitarian. Respect to all proud peoples. Percent Rabzus, Black Power. I love my race. I love your race. But if you want to kill both, screw your race. I say 0% racist. So there. It's the same. La Montagne. Street Press don't talk about it. Indeed, there are very borderline jokes in KPN. That's the essence of black metal. I was saying black metal is not a safe space. It's actually the opposite definition of a safe space. Black metal is essentially blasphemous. He was very anti-Christian at the beginning, except that Christians don't exist today. It's really the least dangerous thing, the most harmless. Today, it's about attacking Christians. They have already been completely pushed out of the public space. If there are truly people who don't get upset when you hit them, it's the Christians. And what I'm saying is that the new religion of the West, it's rights-based anti-racism. So if you want to blaspheme effectively, you have to attack. You have to blaspheme where it hurts. When I said that anarchism advocates the autonomy of moral conscience beyond good and evil defined by a majority orthodoxy, what is good defined by a majority orthodoxy today? Well, it is obviously anti-racism. What is the evil defined by a majority orthodoxy today? The racism.